Hello everyone, I'm Adam Steele from EVO, and this is a video where I'm going to help you set your EVO 4, EVO 8 or EVO 16 up with your DAW. Today, we're going to be covering Reaper. First things first, we're going to want to plug in our interface. If it's an EVO 4 or EVO 8, we're going to want to plug the USB-C connection straight into our Mac or PC. If we're using a Mac, it's likely going to be a USB-C to C cable. If it's a PC, it's likely to be a USB-C to A cable. Both work exactly the same, provide exactly the same sound quality, it just depends which end works with your machine. Next, we're going to look at drivers. Whilst it is true that many Macs and PCs will work to some extent with an EVO interface without any extra software, we highly recommend that you get the drivers from the EVO website. These will give you the best functionality, the most performance with your DAW, and the best overall experience. So head to evo.audio in your browser. So here we are at the evo.audio website, and we're going to go to the top to Products and select the audio interface from here that is exactly the one that you own. In my case here, it's the EVO 4. Head down the page a little bit and we will see a Downloads tab. Give this a click and we bring up a page with the documents, including the manuals if you want to read in detail, and also the drivers at the bottom of the page for Mac and Windows. Select the one that is relevant to you, get that downloaded and install that on your computer, and I'll see you back here shortly. Once the EVO app is installed on your computer, you will now have this running in the top right corner on macOS and in the bottom right on Windows with the letter E. If we give that a click, then we can click Show EVO Control or to show the mixer for the EVO 8 and EVO 16. The EVO Control for the EVO 4 is a nice way to look at exactly the same features that are available on the front of the hardware. With the EVO 8 and 16, the EVO Mixer will give you some more control over the more fine aspects that we will cover later on. The first thing that I'm going to do to get sound is plug in a microphone. I'm going to plug this into input 1 on the EVO 4. This process is the same on the EVO 8 and EVO 16. I've plugged in this vocal microphone and it needs two things. It needs power and it needs gain. So what we're going to do is press the number 1, which selects channel 1. And then first thing I need for this is phantom power. So I'm now going to hit the 48V button for phantom power. And that means this microphone, given a couple of seconds, is now powered. The next thing it needs is gain. And we have two choices there. Either we can do that by hitting number 1 and then manually selecting the amount of gain that we need from the large knob on the front of the EVO interface, or we can use the Smart Gain feature. Check out Smart Gain in the manual and on some of the other videos here. Now that we've got our drivers and we have a microphone plugged in, let's fire up Reaper. If this is the first time you've opened Reaper, you may find this window about evaluating. If you're in your 60-day evaluation trial, you can just hit still evaluating, otherwise this is where you put your license key. Now once you've opened Reaper, the first thing that I would do is save the project. So you can go to File and Save Project As, find an appropriate folder and name your project appropriately. In my case, I've called this EVO 4. And now we need to choose and set our audio interface and settings. If this didn't come up by default at the start when it was asking if an audio interface needs setting, then we will find this on the top bar here in macOS and also at the top right on Windows. Give this a quick click and go to Audio Device Settings. The first thing we need to choose here is our audio device, which is going to be EVO 4 or 8 or 16 respectively. And we have these two options here. One is Request Sample Rate, which is choosing a sample rate in Hertz. Usually, most people will choose between 44.1 kilohertz, which is kind of generally accepted as the CD format, or 48 kilohertz, which is accepted as the film and DVD sample rate. There are others you can choose. If in doubt, leave a comment below or look on the Audient support. The next setting underneath is Request Block Size, and this is important because this is relevant to latency and buffering. If you're going to be listening to your microphones through Reaper's processing, whether you're adding compressors, equalizers, anything else like that, you're going to need to adjust your latency. If the latency is too much, then you'll find the delay between making the sound and something coming out of your headphones or speakers may be too much and may be disorienting. Conversely, if you keep the buffer nice and small, this won't be a problem, but that will put significant stress on your Mac or your PC, and as your song gets more busy, more layers, more tracks, this may become an issue where you start to hear pops, clicks, dropouts, where the computer is struggling to handle everything. That's a balance that needs to be struck and very much depends on what it is that you're doing at any time. This number is what we call a power of 2. So we go from 32 is the smallest number, then 64, 128, 256, 512, 1024, and so on. I recommend experimenting with this. I tend to use 128 as my buffer amount most of the time, and if the computer is struggling, then I will change it to something like 512. At this point, I can hit OK, and I can make myself a track, so we can begin. With my microphone plugged in and powered, and a decent amount of gain applied, then I can double click in this big space on the left, and that will make me a new track. Alternatively, I can go to the menu at the top, track, and insert new track. Once the track is there, in this blank space, I can name this appropriately. I'm going to name it Mic 1. And next to it is the record arm button. If we press that once, we can now see that that armed the track, and by default, it chose input 1 as its input. If that's not the case, if you're plugged into input 2 or on the EVO 8 or 16, 3, 4, all the way up to 8 and beyond on the 16, then there is a down arrow here that we will click, and we can choose whether we want a mono or stereo input on this. Stereo might be appropriate if you're recording something like a keyboard with stereo inputs. Mono is usually more appropriate if it's a microphone. So in this case, we have mic instrument 1 chosen, although we could choose 2 here, and the list grows depending on your interface. Now we can see it and we're ready to record, but we can't hear anything yet. You may notice that I've not mentioned anything yet about speakers or headphones, because at this point, I find it to be good practice to turn those on and turn those up when everything else is ready. Otherwise, we could have clicks, pops, transients that may damage the speakers, especially if they're turned up all the way. So after turning on your speaker monitors or plugging in your headphones, then we click the volume button on the EVO 4 and turn that up appropriately. You may find that if your speaker monitors are turned up really high, you don't need much volume out of the EVO, in which case it may be prudent to turn down the volume on the monitors a little bit and then use more of the output on the EVO 4 to provide a good balance. You may still not be able to hear anything at this point, and that's because we need to talk about monitoring. There are 2 different ways to apply monitoring. One is through Reaper, and the other one is directly through the EVO interface. If we are to monitor through Reaper, that will take into account that latency and buffer that we were talking about before, but will allow you to do things like EQ, compression, reverb, all live back into the headphones and speakers. So that may be the option that you require. In that case, we tick the little speaker icon on the track next to the little record button. That way, we are now monitoring, and we can see in the bottom left that we are moving audio through the master output, which means that should then be coming out of your speakers or headphones. Alternatively, if we turn that back off, which takes an extra 2 clicks, by the way, because there is an extra mode on here called auto monitoring, which we're just going to skip past. Then we're going to open up either the EVO Control or the EVO Mixer if you're using the EVO 8 or 16. On the EVO Control, you can see the same controls that are physically on the front of the EVO 4. So we're going to choose the little faders icon here, and I'm going to do exactly the same on the front of the EVO 4. And now as I move the knob, the encoder, on the EVO Control, you can see that LED moving left to right. If that's all the way to the left, you're seeing the audio monitoring straight from 1 and 2, straight to the headphones, straight to the monitors. And if it's all the way to the right, then you're only hearing the audio from Reaper. If it's halfway in between the 2, then you're getting an equal mix of both, and then you can move the encoder left or right to get more or less of the input as a balance with Reaper. In the EVO Mixer, you would turn a slider up and down, which is individual for each channel, so you can then hear that channel coming through near 0 latency monitoring. and by default the output from Reaper will be coming through on the EVO mixer on DAW 1 and 2. You may find that you come across a phenomenon that I call ghosting, which is where you can hear a chorusing or doubling effect of the vocal, where it sounds almost robotic. That will happen if you have both types of monitoring enabled at the same time. So if you have the Reaper monitoring and the EVO mixer or the EVO control set to have any of the input, that will cause issues. So at this point we need to make a decision. Do we use the Reaper or the near zero latency EVO monitoring? In this case, I'm going to use the Reaper monitoring. So I'm going to turn the monitoring here in the EVO control all the way to the right, and then turn on the monitoring in Reaper. And that's it. So if there's anything else that you'd like us to answer for you, please feel free to leave a comment down below in the comments section. Otherwise, if there's anything else you still need, feel free to talk to us at our support. Thanks everybody for watching. Good luck and have fun, and we'll see you soon.